first one is number 23, Come and Behold.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Glenview New Church. Today we're going to be continuing a series that we started last week called Under Siege. Let's get started right away by inviting the Lord in with song.
Okay, please rise. Our first song is the Cares Chorus, which is number 19. The Cares Chorus.
The Lord is my strength and my shield. Let us pray. Lord God Jesus Christ, we pray to you this morning that you open our minds and our hearts to your teaching and to your leading, and that you form us more and more into the community that is your church. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, as in heaven, so on the earth. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. The Lord forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Amen. So as a recitation, let's say together Psalm 33, verse 20. Worship verse. Our soul waits for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. So the series is called Under Siege. And I'll catch you up on what happened last week for those of you that missed it. First, just sort of a quick thought on sieges themselves. Can anyone give like a quick definition of what a siege is? Nobody knows.
It's when you're surrounded and you have no way to escape.
Great. Surrounded, no way to escape.
No way to escape.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Yes, no, that's a perfect definition of a siege. When you're under siege, you're surrounded and there's no way to escape. So who here has ever built a snowboard? Okay. Why would you do that? Well, it's fun, right? But a snowboard is also useful. If somebody wants to throw snowballs at you and you're behind a wall of snow, they can't hit you, right? I mean, unless you stick your head up and you get hit in the face. But if you stay down behind the wall, they can't get you. The story we've been reading last week and this week, and also we'll get into it next week, is about King Hezekiah. And he was the king of the southern kingdom of Judah. And one of the things that he did early on in his reign was he built new walls around the city of Jerusalem. See, Jerusalem started as a walled city, but as more and more people came to the city, it grew outside of its walls. Hezekiah built new walls so that everyone in the city could be behind the wall. Why would a city want walls? Like, Glenview doesn't have walls. Chicago's not surrounded by walls. Why would a city back then want a wall? You guys are so
Avoid snowballs.
What?
Avoid snowballs.
Stop snowballs. Not a lot of snowballs in Judah.
To not be conquered.
To not be conquered, right. Because the people that lived in Jerusalem, they weren't this big, powerful group. They didn't have a standing army. They didn't even have lots of people. They were a small people, kind of weak compared to their neighbors when the story happens. And their king knew they would need protection if an army came. Because if an army came and all the people in the city tried to fight the army, they would lose. But with the walls around the city, it would be very hard for the army to get them. And so our story is about an army that wanted to get them but couldn't get past the walls. And so instead what they did was they surrounded the city, made it so no one could get out. That's why it's called under siege. Now, they could stay in there a long time because they had stored up food. And another thing that King Hezekiah did was he dug a tunnel underneath the rock underneath the city, connecting a spring to a pool on the inside of the walls so that people could get fresh water. So eventually, if this army was going to attack the city, they're going to have to wait either a really long time for the food to run out, or they're going to have to protect the walls. Now the bad news is this particular army is the army of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and they've gotten very good at attacking cities. Because this is what everybody would do. They would build walls around their cities, and when the Assyrians, if the Assyrians wanted to conquer people, they had to learn how to defeat walls. But the Assyrians were really, really clever. So they would build these towers on wheels, and the top part of the tower would have like a little mini fort, and people with arrows would be up there in their mini fort. And then on the next layer, they would be underneath a roof and protected to be battering ram. And on the bottom, there would be people who pushed it, and also there would be someone whose job it was to put out fires in case anyone tried to set it on fire. And then what they would do is they would slowly build a ramp, so it got closer and closer to the top of the wall, and they would push this up the ramp until they get to the wall, and then they'd try to knock the wall down. And they were really good at this. And this is the threat that the city of Jerusalem is facing. Now, the Assyrians are super clever as military strategists, not just in terms of how they fought on the battlefield, but also wherever they went, they would bring a network of spies and informants and scouts. And these guys would go out into the land and find out all of the weak points of an enemy. A weak point could be a city that doesn't have big enough walls, or it could be a hole in the wall that they could exploit. But a weak point could also be a weak point in the people. Like, for instance, if a king had done something that the people didn't like, well, the spies would find out about that so they could use it against the king. Stuff like that. Every single person, object, and place in the word has a symbolic meaning. This is what the kingdom of Assyria represents. Assyria is skewed reasoning. In the word, Assyria is always taken to mean matters of reason, sometimes in a good sense. So it can be rational thinking, but it also can be rationalizations. So here's the difference. Rational thinking is when we use our minds to figure something out, to find out what's true. And if you've ever read a murder mystery and then figured out the solution, you're using reason. If you've ever had a hard problem to solve or a hard decision to make, and you use your mind to sort of weigh all of the different factors and come up with a solution, that's using your reasoning. But reasoning can be used for bad things too. You can also rationalize. Like, for instance, if somebody says, "Why did you eat that last slice of pizza? That was mine." You could just be honest and say, "Well, I couldn't help myself. It was a weak moment and I'm sorry." You could, maybe it's the truth, say, "I didn't realize it was your slice of pizza. I thought it was for me." If that's true, you can say that. But you could also try to make an argument to turn it around and make it their fault. And they say, "Well, last time when there was only one slice of pizza, it was mine, and somebody ate it. And I'm not saying it was you, but it wasn't me. So it's okay." My son's smiling right now. I'm using it as an example of constant fight that's going on in my house, by the way. This is real theology that's happening right here. So that's rationalization to say, "Well, somebody ate my last slice, so now I get to eat your last slice." Well, no, that doesn't make sense. But you're using your mind to try to make something make sense, to make what you want to be true. Reason can be used in other sort of more complicated ways that are both good and bad. You can use reason to talk somebody out of making a very bad decision. If you know somebody who's about to do something that they really shouldn't do, that's going to cause a lot of harm, you can talk to them and you can say, "Look, every time somebody does this, here are all the bad consequences that happen. And you think that you've got nothing to lose, and you might as well just do this anyway, but I'm going to tell you, here are things that will actually get worse in your life." And you can argue with people try to help them not make bad mistakes. You can also use your reason to try to pick apart somebody's belief system. Somebody who sincerely believes in some principle that they're leading their life by that you don't agree with. You could use your reason to make their beliefs sound silly. And that would be wrong. Assyria, in the story we're reading, we read last week and we'll get to in a minute for this week. In this particular case, this is operating at a couple of different levels. On the highest level, this is actually a story about a spiritual struggle that the Lord went through when he was on earth. I'm not going to look at that level so much today. On another level, this is a story about the conflict that sometimes happens between people that are religious and trying to be spiritual and the general culture around them. Very often, spiritual principles come under attack from reasonings. And so the story tells us a little bit what to do then. The area I want you to most focus on when we talk today is a kind of fight that goes on inside each one of us. It's something we all have to face now and then. Imagine you've been living your life according to principles that you think are true. And it's not going well. What do I mean by not going well? Well, you try to be honest, but you work somewhere where people aren't honest, and the dishonest people get ahead, and you fall behind. You try to be kind and generous to people, and the people that you're generous to take advantage of you, or even behind your back say mean things about you, even after you've done nice things for them. Or any number of scenarios where you try to do what's right, and for one reason or another, it seems to come back at you in harm. If this happens, and it happens enough, you may start to hear a voice in your head that says, you know what? Maybe it's not worth it. Maybe trying to make honesty the most important thing in my life, maybe that's a mistake. Maybe being generous is a bad idea because you've got to protect yourself from bad people. And these reasonings start to go through your head, explaining why the thing that you believe to be good and true isn't worth believing in. And this can cause turmoil in your heart. And that turmoil, that struggle, is what temptation is. When there's something good in you, and it's under attack, and the attack often feels like the attack's also coming from you. So last week, we read the story about the Assyrian army coming, and while the king of Assyria was leading the siege of the city of Lachish, which is this big fortified city that guarded the pass that would both lead to Jerusalem and also the road down to Egypt, while he's fighting there, he sends his right-hand man, who has this really cool-sounding title. He's the Rab Shah, which means cupbearer. This is a guy who speaks multiple languages. He knows the mind of the king. He's his right-hand man. When the Rab Shah speaks, the king speaks. And the Rab Shah came with soldiers to Jerusalem, surrounded the city, and spoke to the city. And his main message was, you can't trust King Hezekiah. And you can't trust him because, first of all, he destroyed Jehovah's altars. You want Jehovah to save you? Jehovah can't love King Hezekiah. No, this was the truth. He did destroy those altars, but those altars weren't the Lord's altars. Those were these extra places that people had set up to try to worship that were imitating idolatrous worship that was going on in the land. And Hezekiah was right to shut all that down. But the Assyrians are turning it into a mistake. He said, you've been trusting in the Egyptians? You can't trust those guys. They'll never help you. Trusting the Egyptians like leaning on a broken reed. It won't hold you up. It's going to stab your hand. Then finally he said, it's a mistake to follow Hezekiah because your own God, Jehovah, sent me to punish you. Don't trust Hezekiah. And if you remember, at the end of last week, the solution, the first part of the solution, was to say nothing. The king had commanded the people, don't respond to the Assyrians when they start to throw the stuff at you. Because the Assyrians, they've been gathering intelligence about all the different things that people in Jerusalem might be worried about and might believe. But the king said, look, just don't listen to them, don't argue back. And so there was no response. Instead, they came to Hezekiah and said, here's what was said. And we talked about how this order to not respond to the Assyrians is in fact sometimes a useful strategy for us when we feel like there are all these arguments against some principle that's the king in our heart, some principle that we believe in. And the arguments sound like they're pretty clever, and yet it feels like there's still something wrong about them. We just don't know how to argue back. Now, sometimes arguing back is a mistake. There are times when you should present a truth to try to conquer falsehood. There are also times when you need to be open-minded and hear alternative perspectives and to consider alternatives to what you believe, because you know what? Sometimes you're wrong. But sometimes fighting the fight up here in terms of thoughts and arguments and reasonings is missing the point that there's a kind of truth that resides here in your heart. In the discussion last week, it came up a number of times that this could be challenging. Well, how do you know when you should be open-minded? How do you know when you should fight? How do you know when you should disengage? That takes us to today. So, here's what happened after the people were silent. Here's what Hezekiah did. As soon as King Hezekiah heard all this, he tore his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth. That's like stuff you would make sackcloth. It's like really rough, uncomfortable stuff. Symbolically, this is him being sad about the attack on everything that's true and good. And he went into the house of Jehovah, the temple in Jerusalem. And he sent Eliakim, who was over the household, and Shebna, the secretary, and the senior priests, covered with sackcloth, to the prophet Isaiah, the son of Amos. So, Isaiah had been a prophet in this area for a while. And in fact, Isaiah is one of the biggest prophets in the whole Bible. He has his own book that has 66 chapters in it. I think it's 66. 60-something. It's the biggest book in the Old Testament. Isaiah was a prophet. He spoke for God. And his main job was to notice when the king of Israel and the king of Judah were leading people away from the Lord, his job was to speak up and say, oh, you're making a mistake. And in fact, in the book of Isaiah, before these events happened, we see Isaiah specifically warning the king about things that are coming. And one of the things he says is, the Egyptians are not going to save you. If you want to be saved from the Assyrians, you have to trust in the Lord and not the Egyptians. Anyway, so the king sends a message to Isaiah. And the messengers said to Isaiah, thus says King Hezekiah, this day is a day of distress, of rebuke, and of disgrace. Children have come to the point of birth, and there is no strength to bring them forth. It's an idiomatic saying. The children have come forth, but there's no strength for them to be born. Hezekiah was leading a rebellion against the Assyrians. His father had actually paid tribute to the Assyrians. And in fact, all the kings in the area had. But Hezekiah was part of a rebellion that turned against the Assyrians when their new king came into power. They saw an opportunity. And now Hezekiah is saying, our rebellion is going to end before it begins. The baby's ready to be born, but the mother has no strength. There's another reason that children are mentioned here. Children in the Word are symbols of innocence. And what innocence really is an attitude that says, I'm I'm going to trust the Lord. I'm going to put my fate in his hands. I'm going to do what I see his word telling me to do and trust that will lead to good. Even when at first it doesn't seem to be working. Even when people give me arguments as to why I shouldn't bother. I'm going to be like a little child. And so that image of innocence is being evoked here. It may be, this message is continuing, that Jehovah your God heard all the words of Rabshakeh, whom his master, the king of Assyria, has sent to mock the living God. And it may be that you will rebuke the words that Jehovah your God has heard. Therefore, lift up your prayer for the remnant that is left. Boy, there's so much in this one. I could give you like 3 sermons on this message here. I'm not going to do that though. I don't have time for 3 sermons today. The remnant. Scholars have wondered why Hezekiah uses that term here. Because normally, in the Old Testament, when people talk about the remnant, they're talking about people that were left behind after everyone else was conquered and taken away. Now, it's possible that he's saying that all of Judah are the remnant, because the Assyrians have already conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, and most of those people have been hauled off to what is now modern-day Iran, way far to the east. Others have said, well, you know what, actually, the king of Judah, that's too big to be a remnant of the people left behind, because that usually means a small group. Maybe Hezekiah is saying, some people escaped from the northern kingdom, and you're supposed to pray for them. But here's the thing. Whatever is reasoning in the literal story for using this term remnant, whenever we, in the new church, hear the word remnant, we should think about a very specific spiritual principle. Sometimes we refer to it as remains or remainders, but it's literally coming from these stories in the Old Testament. People get conquered, and a small group of people get left behind. They remain behind. And what these people that remain symbolize is these sort of echoes of borrowed states of heavenly joy that we all have within us. Because here's what happens when we live. And it starts when we're infants, but this process continues all throughout adulthood. And in fact, the remains that we gain as adults are actually more important in some ways, and more powerful in many ways than the ones we get as children. Here's how we gain them. You live your life. Every once in a while, you have an experience that is like a little taste of what heaven is. It can happen when you witness somebody or receive from somebody an act of just completely selfless service. It happens when you do something for somebody else out of selfless love. And in an uncomplicated way, you sort of step into the stream of God's leading, and you experience joy, or experience peace. There are these moments, some of them ineffable moments of happiness. Others are just little moments of satisfaction. And these are like little gifts that we're led to experience, accumulate in our lives as we grow up, and as we live our lives. And the memories of them get stored within us. And these are the foundation upon which the Lord pulls us out of trouble when we're in temptation. They're there for us to access and to remember. When you're in a moment of complete despair, when you can't imagine a happy result from what you're facing, I encourage you to just take an inventory of your life. If you take an honest, objective look, you will find in your history these moments of real happiness, of real joy, that prove that joy, happiness, spiritual peace, the joy of the Lord's kingdom, are real. And if you've experienced them in the past in small ways, they are available to you in the future. So he asks us to pray for this. Now when the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah, Isaiah said to them, "Say this to your master. Thus says Jehovah, do not be afraid because of the words that you have heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have reviled me. Behold, I will put a spirit in him, so that he shall hear a rumor and return to his own land, and I will make him fall by the sword in his own land." The message is, I'm going to take care of this. I'm going to send him away. And in fact, he's going to go home, and he's going to die by the sword. Which happens, by the way. History records that the king of Assyria was assassinated by two of his sons while praying at the temple. But he also says, do not be afraid of the words. You don't have to be afraid of the thoughts coming into your head. You don't have to be afraid of the arguments that attack the things that you hold dear. They're just words. You don't have to give them power. So last week, part one of how do we respond when we're under attack is don't argue. Part two was go to Isaiah. Isaiah's dead. How do we go to Isaiah? In the book of Prophets Revealed, we're told this about the symbolism of prophets. It says this: a prophet symbolizes the doctrine of the church drawn from the word. Doctrines being teachings. And the same is meant by a prophecy, because the word was written by prophets, and in heaven, a person is regarded in relation to something pertaining to their occupation or function. So too, every person, spirit, and angel mentioned in the word. Because it was a prophet's function to write and teach the word, therefore when a prophet is mentioned, the word in relation to teaching is meant, or doctrine drawn from the word. So King Hezekiah goes to Isaiah. We go to the word. Now, that's probably not a surprising thing for you to hear me say. I'm telling you guys to go to the word all the time. It's one of my life's missions to get you guys to go to the word, to read it for yourself, to seek wisdom in it. But why? Why is going to the word helpful in this particular case? Well, remember that we have this challenge. How do we know when this is us being stubborn and locking down on something we don't want to let go of, versus us sensing something dear that needs protecting but not knowing how to protect it? You go to an outside source. You seek wisdom outside of yourself. And unsurprisingly, it is my professional opinion that the Lord's Word is a very good source for outside wisdom. Now, the Assyria of the world may argue, well, you know, that book doesn't make a lot of sense on the face of it. And there are pieces of it that clearly don't relate to life today. You're really going to go to a bunch of old scrolls from 2,000 years ago to seek objective wisdom? Yeah. Could a bunch of scrolls survive and in fact be revered for 2,000 years if they didn't in some way work? Just from a social evolutionary standpoint, the Bible has proven it's got something, even if people don't understand what or why. And one of the reasons it's easy to argue against the Bible as a source is that most people don't understand where the holiness of the Word lives. It's not just in the literal source, but in these layers of wisdom that are encoded in it. Encoded in a pretty remarkable way. And when we start to get into a metaphorical or spiritual understanding of the Word, really deep, eternal truths start to come out, which have application in any era that has human beings in it. Because human beings really don't change from millennium to millennium. So we turn to the Word for wisdom. Now, I've given a bunch of sermons on how to read the Word, how to go and seek out wisdom, how to understand the internal sense. I'm not going to focus on that here today. Going to the Word is important, but I want to read you the next part of the story. So, send a message to Isaiah, turn to the Word. From the Word they hear, don't be afraid of the words of the Assyrians. I'm going to take care of this. And the Rabshakeh returned and found the king of Assyria fighting against Libnah. So the Rabshakeh himself leaves Jerusalem, goes back to his king. This king has moved on. He's now attacking another smaller city, Libnah. For he heard that the king had left Lachish. Now, the king heard concerning Tirhakah, king of Cush. Behold, he has set out to fight against you. Now, this Tirhakah, he is the future pharaoh. Cush is modern-day Ethiopia and into Sudan a little bit. And so this future pharaoh is leading an army up north out of Africa to attack the Assyrians. So the Assyrian king figures, well, I guess if the rebellion's still going, Hezekiah hasn't learned his lesson. So he sent messengers again to Hezekiah, saying, thus shall you speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah. Do not let, and remember, last week the argument was, don't trust Hezekiah. The message. Do not let your God, in whom you trust, deceive you, by promising that Jerusalem will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Behold, you have heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all the lands, devoting them to destruction. And you, shall you be delivered? Have the gods of the nations delivered them, the nations that my fathers destroyed, Gozan, Haran, Rezeph, and the people of Eden who were in Telesar? Where is the king of Hamath, the king of Arpad, the king of the city of the Sepharvaim, the king of Hanok, or the king of Nineveh? Last week I said that the series has a certain jazz aspect to it and that never quite resolves. If this was a straightforward script, the storyline would be this. The Assyrians come to Jerusalem, Hezekiah turns to the Word, the Lord through the Word says, don't worry about it, it's going to be fine, and then everything gets resolved, and we're done. But you know what? Life doesn't always work like that. In this case, they turn to the Word tells them, don't worry about the arguments or the ideas or the thoughts. You don't have to be afraid of them. It doesn't lift the siege. There's still a fight going. The Lord hasn't followed through on what he said he was going to do. Why? What do we get from this? Reading the Word is not enough. It's important. It's necessary. It's insufficient. You cannot read your way out of temptation. And that's what we're about for today. It's a long and complicated story. I'd love to just have a happy ending every Sunday, but I'm kind of enjoying the dramatic tension of this. So they're still in trouble, they're still surrounded, they're still under siege. And now the Assyrians have shifted the argument away from, well, you can't trust this principle you believe in. Now the Assyrians are saying, you can't trust God. Your belief in God himself is leading you astray. Let it go, because you're in trouble. So, I told you there are 3 parts to the solution. Obviously, next week we get the 3rd part. But now I'd like to invite you to bow your heads in prayer. Lord, help us when we are in temptation. Help us when we struggle. And help us to not be afraid of the words, the ideas, the arguments that sometimes come into our head. Help us be courageous and to be innocent and to follow your lead and trust. Hear now the silent prayer in your hearts. In your name, Lord, we pray. Amen.
Okay, please rise for our next song. Our next song is number 158, Battle Belongs to the Lord. 158.
Lord, freely you have given and freely we have received. Accept now this free will offering from the heart for the building of your church. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you all. Amen.
Okay, we will now sing our final song, which is number 60, Healer of My Soul. Number 60.
Healer
Who was that? Was that Mozart?
That was Mozart.
All right. Thank you for some Mozart. That was beautiful. All right. Have some time for thoughts, questions, comments. What did that stimulate for you guys? Got a mic behind you.
Some of the conversations I had with some of my young adult children over the summer has been the difference between choosing and interpretation when it comes to the writings.
Okay.
Because it can be a gray area. So I'm reading this, I see what the words are saying, and I'm either choosing not to believe it or believe it, or I'm interpreting what it's saying differently than what you are saying.
Right.
And that's been some tough decisions, because how do you say, well, this is what it says, when they're saying, well, I'm interpreting it this way. And I don't have an easy answer for any of that yet. And, you know, they're taking classes in Bernathen as well, and the teachers are giving interpretation, and they're discussing that interpretation or how that teacher is viewing what the writings are saying. But then they come away and they make their own choices based on their interpretation. So
Yeah.
I'm looking for the black and white answer to that.
Okay. Well, that's a big one. So we're going to cancel all the other questions so I can answer that. No. So just one thought on that. A couple thoughts on that. First of all, what you described, that is one of the root challenges within the larger body of the priesthood. Is there are all of these people that are very deeply reading the word, but not always coming to the same interpretation. And so how do you navigate that when we're meant to be leading the same church? And you know, how do you create an environment, whether it's within your own family or church-wide or in a community, which leaves room for differing interpretations? Even ones that sometimes we find very, very challenging. And I'd say the first principle is be very careful that you don't let, sort of as a rule, make it against the rules in conversations like that to attribute motive to other people's interpretations, because that can really trip you up. Either side can easily say, well, you just see it that way because you want blah. As soon as you cross that line, the conversation sort of falls apart. Related to that, be wary of the trap of saying, well, if somebody else is interpreting it differently than I am, they're not actually reading it. Even if you see a totally plain reading that has no room for interpretation, you still have to allow for the fact that maybe somebody sees something you don't see. I'm giving you a lot of gray. I know you want black and white. But I think you have to start with those two, of saying there has to be room for an interpretive discussion, and assigning motive or declaring that your interpretation means you're not reading kills the conversation. And that you're having the conversation is a very positive thing. That said, there are rules of interpretation, too. If you come up with an interpretation that is directly in conflict with other true things, it must not be true. And so you now have to rethink that interpretation. Whereas an interpretation that is well supported by other statements in other places, well, that's got internal consistency and has more strength. And I could actually talk at great length about sort of rules for interpretation, and if you want, we can have a one-on-one conversation afterwards. What's that? Yeah, you're hearing that I'm supporting you having interpretations, right, guys? All right, we could go more on to that, but yes.
I'm going to piggyback on Brandon. I'm also big on black and white, by the way. Your very beautiful presentation of going to the Lord's Word when we're questioning our motivations. Maybe that's the strange way to put it, but I accept that completely. But going to the Lord's Word can be a slippery slope as well.
Yeah.
It depends how you go to the Lord's Word. If you go to the Lord's Word with a completely open mind, asking for some direction and some leadership, that's one thing. But it's so easy to go to the Lord's Word with kind of a predetermined feeling or idea.
Yes.
and then you use the Lord's word to rationalize, going back to the early part of your conversation, to rationalize your thought, and everything's fine because the Lord agrees with you. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a mental preparation, I guess, in going to the Lord's word. And the Lord's word, to me, frankly, means more the writings, because I can read them. I can't. I just finished reading the stories that you're reading, and wow, I suddenly realized what I've been missing for the last 2 weeks. Anyhow, just a thought.
Yeah, well, and I think that's one of the reasons that in Hezekiah's appeal to Isaiah, we're given this imagery of children being born, like of pregnant women and newborns, and also this reference to the remnant. I think we're being called kind of subtly to recognize that, yeah, when you go to the Word, it has to be with an attitude of innocence and obedience rather than, I'm going to go get ammunition for my fight. It is really easy to dig into the Word in order to figure out who's right. The goal should be to look to the Word to find out what is right. And instead of trying to win an argument, seek truth. And yes, it's very hard. And there's a third part to this series, which is going to shed some light on that. But yeah, that's great stuff.
I appreciate that you said it's just words, because I think of how often I've gotten off track when you have a conversation with someone completely in opposition to something that you really believe, your core beliefs. And I appreciate the idea to come back to the rock in your center, because they're just words. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're right and you're wrong. Because when you're talking about core beliefs, it can really rock you.
Yeah.
So thank you.
I want to say that something I ask my kids, and I say all the time to friends, is what will people think about us in 1,000 years? We are constantly discovering the truth. Like, people think that science is opposed to God, or that this is opposed to God, but God invented math, invented science, invented that all was there. We're discovering it. So we're discovering the truth, and there's always going to be a deeper truth. It says in the writings that the Word is in the bottomless well of truth, so that 600 billion years from now, in Earth time, people will still be reading the Word in heaven, and will still be discovering new truths. So,
All right. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Don't see any other hands. Really quickly, announcements. Get the announcement sheet. If you all turn to the back of the announcement sheets, the most important announcement is there. It's a really quiet week. So the school year is about to kick off. That's a big thing that's coming up. We have our teachers are sort of coming back. We've got meetings coming up. And on August 22nd, at 8:30 in the morning, we're going to have the school opening. And if you are a parent of a student here, or a grandparent, or just a friend or supporter of the school, you are welcome to come to the opening ceremonies. Beforehand, there's like I think we're calling it Coffee with the Pastors, or Pastor. I don't know which pastor it will be this time. But there'll be coffee, come hang out, and there's something sort of sweet and innocent about the beginning of the school year. And I know, it's also a work day, so a lot of people can't make it if they have jobs. But if you're at all able to make it, I think it's a really nice way of participating in this use of the community, and I think you'll enjoy yourself. Other than that, we've got the annual golf outing. That's about a month out, so I'm not going to say much more about that right now. And you can read the rest for the other announcements. And I hope you guys all have a great Sunday and a great week, and I'll see you next week.